it is about making a structure, a city, as a kind of complete work. The notions that we've been looking at are sort of how you make environments which allow people to integrate a variety of different kinds of people, how they integrate that with work and place, a sense of place, a sense of purpose, as opposed to, as I think some of the sort of project-type environments that we've seen. The exterior of it, the second drawing here, so begins to talk about the nature of its impact on the landscape, as opposed to simply being a tower that I suppose fills with as many people as possible. It also asks questions about the nature of the social use of a tower, a tall building. What does that really mean? What does that really mean in, I suppose, according to the United Nations, 70% of the population living in cities, and yet there are 10 major slums across the world which nobody can either do anything with or clear. 23 de Enero is in Caracas. The middle image shows a series of blocks that are built essentially for middle-class housing, which have been squatted since the revolution, and which have then spawned a whole hillside of accommodation. Why do people come to the city in the first place? I suppose they come because they need work, because of the change, the shift in the way in which the world is run and the world plays. For us, some of those questions could be dealt with the standard sort of cluster developments, same rat runs of tight, dense housing, giving rise to the same problems but in new blocks designed by architects, by us. And in our case, we want to do something which would give enclosure, place, and become a landmark, a place to be proud of, a place to point to say, this is where I am. A place which would mean that other people, higher income levels, would also want to go to. And how do you structure such a proposal? So we've got some cups, some coffee cups, we stack them up. And then we've got a spoon, and fill that with water as a structural element. Why those things? Well, how do you get large enclosure, and how do you get light to all of those people? How do you get a sense of view and vision? And also, we wanted some kind of skin which breathed, which did something more than simply enclosed you, but gave you an opportunity to have some energy. It was a living thing. And the final drawing on the side here is to show the way in which it's structured. In many ways, the tower is a trick. It looks like it's some kind of strange cantilever, when in fact it's actually got legs running through it. It's about positioning of the legs in relation to the rest of the tower. A bit more about the site. This and the politics of this region and many of the other 10 UN slum areas mean that people have no ownership, and they can never leverage any kind of future for their children, for their grandchildren, and they're stuck in a very particular situation. One of the ways you might consider dealing with that or looking at that is to have other kinds of investment that benefit the city, so that those areas weren't places that you simply had people coming into the city to work and to enrich, and then disappear again to the Badlands, but would in some way make for some kind of union, a kind of symbiosis, an understanding of the relationship between those who have and those who have not. The site, the proposal, you can see the site on this side here, with nothing very much except for the slums going to the small city, and our proposal to gradually, slowly rework the area around what is quite a historic site in terms of Enero, and to depopulate that landscape. One of the things we thought about was work and how you might make use of such a construction project to generate income and skills. It's about working in the round rather than simply doing something which is dramatic and sort of stands out. The landscape around there's a series of eco farms, and they provide food direct to the city. Interestingly, it's a parallel with what the source of backgrounds that many people come from. At the same time, new skills are generated in the building of the tower. The tower itself, structurally, it's a series of rings which run together, one on top of the other, built in a series of sections as it gradually grows. The legs themselves are sort of, I suppose they're sort of like living twigs in a sense. They are partly inhabited by smaller businesses, and you rise up through those into the upper sections. The far left, you can sort of see its potential size. The top line shows construction, series of steel forms, the legs of concrete, and the stages of construction. And you see the splayed element, which we sort of work on with Atelier 1 engineers, that sits below in the car park. In fact, the spoon has now become the lagoon, and the whole building is tied through to that. So it's held up partly by the counterweight of the other elements. Inside is very different. The surface is reflective alongside the holes within the tower to let light in. It's a bit of a dream world in a sense, with the bridges cutting across, allowing people to access different parts of the building. It's meant to be luminous. It's almost like a sort of a twilight world, but bright, but different and specific. It's almost a destination. We hope you want to come there to have a look at it. And then the nature of how this lagoon works in relation to the building. The way in which the microclimates that are created in themselves feed through to a series of layered lagoons feeding on the 400-meter long weir driving turbines, and how that itself and the area around it becomes almost like an inland lake, which small businesses can set up around, but that kind of notion persists. The turbines in the coral skin, clearly shown in the middle diagram, and the nature of services. A little bit more about the way that structure works. Each balcony has embedded solar panels. Because of the orientation of the building, they catch the sun almost continuously. The views going back to the hillside, there is a reduction of those elements, and at the base and top of the towers of each segment, there are turbines taking the air as it moves up the building, reusing it and redistributing it about the building for energy and for ventilation. We sort of stepped away from this notion of layered living, which is the first part. It's a mixed community, and so it will have within it a variety of things. We took a model of it to a school and had kids play with it. And it was interesting. I think they most wanted the sweet shops. But beyond the sweet shops, they wanted to have a whole variety of things, schools and shops and banks and clinics mixed in. It's supposed to be a sort of vibrant world where you don't look simply along your street. You can look down into and up into other spaces. Now, it's really just a shell. And in the lower images, it's up to you how you deal with that shell. But one thing that would be interesting about the proposal is that as you give up the hillside, which with some of the sort of political new rights of people who might live in those situations, for a share in this tower, you can choose to either be there, or you can choose to rent it out. You can choose to give it back to the corporation. And in that sense, you get choice. You have an opportunity to either make a life there or somewhere else. And in fact, the tower itself as a kind of lifeline, but we hope will attract a range of people to be there. The aerial parks, well, as you can see, they offer at various levels an opportunity for rest, for relaxation, and the tower itself in its surroundings. And I hope that's fine detail which I've got. Oh, it's an arrow. So this just shows the nature of the world and I suppose the bulk of the elements within it.